Hello and welcome from the Evelyn Y. Davis studio at the National Press Foundation in Washington, D.C. My name is Rachel Jones, and I'm the Director of Journalism Initiatives for NPF. During today's third virtual training for the Widening the Pipeline Fellowship, we're going to be exploring the issues of mental health and trauma, not only as they are reported on and communicated through journalism staffs, but how journalists on the front lines are able to navigate and the emotional impact of bearing witness to many of these traumatic and newsworthy events, as well as the eroding trust in journalism and in reporting. Our first speaker today made history in 2021 as the first African-American executive editor of the Dallas Morning News, after stints as executive editor in Indianapolis at the Star, and also as managing editor of the Norfolk, Virginian Pilot, where she started as an intern. Hardy is part of a growing cohort of African-American female executive editors at American newspapers. And you can read all about her impressive background through her bio on our website at nationalpress.org. Katrice, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thrilled to be here. Thanks for asking me.
I want to start with some comments you made at a Knight Foundation symposium a few months ago. You told your colleagues that while your job in Dallas has been very rewarding, what you've also experienced is more negativity and more criticism of your staffers than you'd ever experienced in your entire life. So I want you to tell us why you made that statement.
Absolutely. So at the time, I think I had been here maybe 6 months, and I remember feeling weighed down a bit when I spoke at that conference, just about the sheer number of threats, frankly, and harassment that my staff had been enduring. One guy in particular actually tracking down an editor's sister's address and using the address in an email to tell her what he would do if we didn't change a story or stop writing about a story about him. Another young man on staff who basically was threatened with his information being hacked by someone he'd written about, who the government had arrested and convicted for hacking. And so it was weighing on me. We had another young woman who was being harassed as well out of Austin. And it just got me thinking about the civility the lack thereof, I should say, that journalists are feeling more than ever, and how we keep our journalists safe. I mean, we do this to serve our communities, but at the end of the day, we have to protect our staff. And so what did that look like in today's time for me as an editor to keep them safe so they can do their work, but know that I cared about them and I want them to use the resources we have available?
Do you believe the past few years of the racial reckoning, as they put it, the police murders and the political turmoil in the US have created an particularly dangerous environment for journalists? And if so, what do we say to the young people today who may be considering it and because of these issues may back away?
I think there are downsides to every profession. When I think about law enforcement and the jobs that they face day in and day out, I think that in general, we are living in different times. I think people have become much more open about their feelings because of social media. It's kind of like we can say whatever we want and we can either hide behind this portfolio online, or I can just tell you who I am. And so people are fed up. I think the pandemic, along with racial reckoning, really caused folks to kind of lose the sense of decorum, if you will. And so I do think it's something that we have to talk to our staffers about. I was at some training a couple of weeks ago that I participated in at Maynard. I was teaching, and this woman taught this great session where she was talking about tools like, mental health toolkit, and how you can take the state training so that you're better protecting your staff for trauma. And then she talked about an app called Delete Me, where we can actually pay for this app so that we're protecting our staffers, what's out there about them publicly. And these are things that I never thought about, or I never thought we would have to deal with as journalists. And so I think we're going to have to really start to think about, as leaders in the industry, how we put forth some measures and how we have frank conversations with our staff about their own social media footprint and protecting themselves, and that this profession has become a profession where we have to be more guarded than we've ever been.
I asked you the other day to consider your own career and your own trajectory. So the next couple of questions I ask you are going to be directed at creating empathy and that bond between you and these fellows. And so when you think back to the start of your career as an intern at the Virginian Pilot, what were some of the most dangerous or difficult experiences you might have had during that time, to help these journalists put in perspective how far we've come?
So it's interesting, when you asked me that question, something came to mind. I was actually an intern at the Biloxi Sun Herald, and I had not graduated college yet. So it was the summer before my senior year. And I'll tell you, my start to this profession was pretty scary. So I was working there. One evening we were having a meeting, and the next thing I know, I hear people running inside the building after the meeting was over, who were outside the building smoking and talking, saying someone was shooting outside. And it turned out that one of the reporters there was shot in the parking lot that evening. And make a long story short, it was devastating. It was very traumatic. She survived. But I remember calling my parents that night and them driving from Louisiana. So it's a 2.5-hour drive to be with me because I was so afraid. My mom saying to me, "Are you sure you want to do this?" And it wasn't some random person. It was someone she knew who actually used to work at the paper. Make a long story short, but that was my beginning into the profession. And I think even then, I mean, while that was traumatic and scary, I knew for certain that I didn't want to do anything different. So fast forward to being at the Pilot, the criticisms will be in a letter that someone wrote, basically saying, "Hey, I didn't like that story. Why'd you write it?" Or, "I think that you're one-sided." That was pretty much what we dealt with. No one even then showed up to protest us, right? We weren't dealing with those things. And so I think now with technology, with being able to reach people immediately, being able to learn so much more about them with all the tools we use as journalists, that's now being used against us. And so, we scream transparency. We talk about, we want the government to be transparent, but yet we're feeling as if we can't be as transparent about who we are. Because some in our community, frankly, are struggling. I mean, these people generally are mentally ill, right? That's really the crisis at stake here. And so how do we navigate that? How do we, and I think about that all the time from every reporting job I had, even when somebody was mad at me, a council member was mad at me, we were able to have a conversation about it and move forward. Didn't mean that we saw eye to eye, but we were able to have a decent civil conversation. And I think, again, going back to civility, that has really changed.
So here's the second exercise in empathy. When something like the Roe versus Wade overturning is announced, journalists like the ones on this call are immediately sent to the streets to get reaction. And in fact, 5 of our journalists were either directly or indirectly involved in covering the tragedy in Uvalde. So as a former shoe leather journalist myself, I understand the stress of having to jump into these events, but I want to know what it's like to be a top executive, the top editor at a paper when something like this happens. Tell us about your stress reaction and how you deal with it.
I think the biggest example of that for me, I had to go back to the George Floyd protests and thinking, man, I mean, I remember being so emotional personally. And in previous positions, when things like that happen, fast forward to Roe versus Wade, I felt as if I couldn't express because I had to be strong for the staff, right? You have to have that armor up and you want the staff to know that, everything's okay, you're poised and control. But I felt at that moment that it was really important to talk to the staff about the fact that I was struggling with this as well. And here's why. And so it was the first time I chose to actually have a staff meeting ahead of that coverage to say, hey guys, I'm really struggling with this too. I mean, as a Black woman, as the editor of the Indie Star, seeing that video, knowing that we're going to have to cover this, I want you to know that I'm just as emotional. And while we have to, control those emotions to cover the story, it's okay to feel them and let's talk about it. So same thing with Roe versus Wade. I mean, it's the same thing that goes through your mind. I think about the men and women in this newsroom and having to go out and when you're out of protest, people are pushed to the breaking point of emotion. So you've got extreme thoughts and passion on both sides. And sometimes that passion is not even that logical, right? They're screaming, they're shouting, they're angry with each other. And so really talking to the staff about, being, again, several things, stay together in a team, let us know where you are, having checkpoints, even understanding, okay, did this same staffer go to Uvalde? We're not going to send that same staffer to Roe versus Wade, trying to make sure that as much as I knew what people were facing, I mean, we have people here who might be struggling with fertility. If I know that, then I'm not going to ask that person to go cover that story. And so knowing your staff and understanding that at the end of the day, while we have a job, you need to also take care of your people and think about that.
Well, you mentioned this, so we can go to the topic of lived experience. And that's something that in many cases, journalists, again, like the ones on this call, either find themselves being challenged because of the ideas that they bring forward due to their lived experience, or whether or not it is valued in the newsroom setting. And so for you, what advice would you give to a young journalist starting out who may be met with some resistance or perhaps lack of understanding of the voice that they bring to the table?
I think a couple of things. It's imperative that we have mentors and folks who we can reach out and talk to as we navigate these situations, especially in news environments where you might be the only or one of few, in communities where that might not be that diverse. Having someone you can have a conversation with about what you're feeling. And then frankly, I mean, all of our news institutions should be not just diverse, but inclusive. And I would tell a young journalist, if you walk into a newsroom and you don't feel that inclusiveness is just as a critical part of that, of the culture, then I would really say that's not the place you want to be. And so, we have tons of job openings in this industry. It's hard to be the only one to fight those fights and to say, look, I lived here. I understand this because of this. I want you to embrace that about me because I can help influence the coverage. If you don't feel like those conversations and, starting with your editor and having those conversations and that you're getting anywhere with that, I really feel like, we've moved too far to have to continue to fight these fights because we have so many other news organizations who are inclusive and who are led by leaders who believe in that and frankly won't tolerate other editors and managers in the room who don't believe in that as well.
I want to remind the fellows on this call that we're going to leave some time at the end for questions. And I hope you will take advantage of this extraordinary opportunity to have a conversation with one of America's leading executive editors of a news organization. So, Katrice, I wanted to move into the fact that, again, as I told you during the call, I was so excited to be speaking with you because of this sort of wave of African-American women rising to the top ranks of news organizations in this country. Tell us about the opportunity and challenge of both of those positions. I have some thoughts about it myself, but I'd love to hear what you have to say.
So generally, I will say this, I feel incredibly blessed to be in this position. I never got into the industry to actually be a top editor. That wasn't a goal. It was just to be a great journalist who, frankly, I just wanted to tell the stories about myself, my community, my people that I thought that mainstream media at the time was neglecting. And so it comes with a sense of wanting to really do things differently. for many, many decades, we've talked about diversity and the importance of covering communities. And so I see myself as I've got to, in every position I have, and now in Dallas, it's really, really important for me to live up to that mission, to do things differently. To start even in thinking about how to structure this newsroom. I've been here now 11 months. How do I restructure the newsroom with diversity in mind? And how do I ensure that not just those folks over there who might have the title equity team cover it, the whole newsroom sees their coverage that way. And it's also, frankly, too, I mean, I think it's also, to me, it's important that I mentor and help others. And so that's critical and key, whether they're in this community, in this newsroom, or they're elsewhere. So I spend a lot of time, Rachel, frankly, out in the community. I've gone to so many different events and festivals where people have said, we've never had an editor from the DMN come. And so to me, that's sad, frankly, because that hadn't happened. But I'll take advantage of this. And so I want you to know we do care. I'm here. Let's talk. And so that is a big part of it. The part that makes me sad is that while we do have this rising number, why has it taken this long? So many of us have worked incredibly hard over the years. And I sometimes wonder or fear that when these announcements are made, people assume it's because of the racial reckoning. Well, they probably didn't earn that position, or, I mean, they're doing that because now that paper or that news institution has to. And I would say, when the story was written about me joining Dallas, the first version of the story had in the lead, first African-American woman to lead. And I thought that is important. And my mom is thrilled about that, and that is a blessing. But that's not why I got this job. And so I asked that be the third paragraph in the story. And so I think, just thinking about that, thinking about the stigmatism sometimes that comes with that, but knowing at the end of the day, and I have to tell myself this, I do deserve to be here. I've worked hard for this position, and I can help this newsroom or this community prosper with the coverage by the leadership positions I've had and by, the authority and position that I bring. And so that's kind of you wrestle with that all the time. I've had the pleasure, because Maria obviously is the editor Reeves in Houston. So I've had the pleasure to spend some time with her. And Andy Alford, who was at the Austin paper as a managing editor, now at Texas Tribune as his their development and training director. I've had some time to spend some time with them. And, we constantly talk to one another. We support one another. It's great to have that network and others, Monica and Mary Irby Jones. And, it's just nice to have that network.
Let's take it back to the issue of trauma and mental health, because I think we would all agree that the past few years of the pandemic have led us all to an understanding of the challenges that families and communities are facing due to the pressures of the economy and life and violence and so many things that are happening. So again, you as a top editor, as you're considering how to weigh this coverage, how do we delve into it, but yet also how do I provide supports to the journalists who are doing this? Do we provide more online harassment training? Tell me how you navigate all of that and how you prioritize the responsibility to cover this topic, but to protect your journalists.
To me, they're equally important. And so, when we thought about Uvalde, and so since I've been here, we had a synagogue shooting and hostage situation. We've had, all kinds of, just as you guys know, the Austin, the lawmakers in Austin are never boring, right? So there's all kinds of historic and precedent-setting legislation coming from them. We've had, obviously, Uvalde, major fires here. So when you start to add up all of these different events, it's critically important that I do weigh at the outset of that, okay, who can go? How long do we keep them? I mean, it even come down to, we didn't want anybody in Uvalde longer than 2 to 3 days because it's too much. And while they were begging in some cases to stay, no, the answer was no, because I need you to come back and take care of yourself. And so we factor that into our kind of a breaking news playbook. We don't want folks to stay too long. We want to make sure that when they get back, we give them time to rest. And so as much as they want to keep working, we're like, no, you're going to take a couple of days off. We factored into, even after Uvalde, okay, so how many weeks should I wait to get the therapy dogs to come in? And so we scheduled that. So we think about that nonstop as part. To me, it's not the coverage in mental health. It's all one plan, and it goes together, because if you don't think about those things, you will keep somebody there too long. You won't realize that, I'm going to make this up, Imelda has gone to the last 3 major breaking news situations, and my God, what's going on with her? And so, part of that was having these mental health experts who understand what we do come in and do training. And so we've had a number of those different scenarios that we've instituted here. Even just saying, hey, we had like an ice cream truck this week. So we're constantly looking for things, thinking about reminding people of our EAP services, and just having kind of just on a virtual thing, hey, how's everybody feeling today? Sometimes that's the topic of the staff meeting. What do you need? Having that's the only agenda item, and just having people share about what they're feeling, and just kind of using that as a time to say, that's the most important thing we're going to deal with today.
And, because you're situated in Texas, and because of the Roe ruling, I mentioned to you that I would ask you the same question that we put to Nicole Carroll of USA Today recently. And that is, as you think about sending journalists out into communities to find the stories related to the ruling or the impact of the ruling, do you feel that you'll need to build an infrastructure even larger when it comes to the issue of trauma reporting, protecting your own mental health, protecting your own safety in a community that is sharply divided, and that where there are strong, obviously pro-life and pro-choice sentiments? How do you prepare or make a game plan for the months to come in that kind of scenario?
It's interesting that you asked that question, because yesterday a group of us got together to talk about the roadmap for the rest of the year. And so we were talking about, do we reassess the breaking news playbook? Do we add other components? I mentioned hearing about this mental health first aid training that when I went to Maynard. So that is now going to be something that we're going to add to that, even down to, frankly, what will our company do to help people who need to have resources, have access resources that they won't be able to access in Texas anymore. And so we were having conversations about that, and we're going to come out with what I feel really good about the stuff we're going to take there as a company. But yeah, I mean, I think it's almost like you have to prepare for the worst, so that you ensure that you are doing all you can to protect not just your staff's mental health, but the community and yourself. And so that goes for me. As tired as I am, what gets me through is getting up and getting a workout in, right? And so, that's my jam. And so saying to people, what is it you need? We have a fully equipped gym in this building. And we've added some things to that this year. So people can just it's hot. You can't walk outside. You don't want to walk at 105 degrees at lunch. So instead of having them do that, they can go downstairs and do that. We're going to have a band, and we were going to have them in person. It might be virtual now because of our COVID. We're red alert now, but having a band at lunchtime play music for us. We've talked about having some poets do kind of a poetry jam at some point. And so thinking about those things that we can add, and seeing it not just as a one-time thing, just because of Uvalde or just because of Roe versus Wade, but it's built into our monthly plans.
Great. Let me stop here and ask, do any of our fellows have any questions? And if you don't, I'm going to jump right back in. So now's your chance. Gabby.
I don't know if I have so much of a question, just as much of a comment. Thank you so much for sharing this, because this is something, online harassment specifically has been a huge issue for us at PolitiFact. With our fact checking, we've received a lot of nasty responses and comments. So thank you for sharing this, because this is helpful just in terms of taking yourself away. And do you have any other advice on how to really combat that, the backlash that we receive? Because we're doing our jobs, so it's not like we're doing anything wrong at all. None of us are, but you know, it's just the backlash that we receive. If you have any more advice, I'd be happy to take it.
Yeah, so I don't know if this is great advice, but I'll tell you it's something I've been thinking about. We had an executive leadership retreat a couple of weeks ago, and we talked a lot about, I think a lot of this goes back to trust as well. People don't trust us. They don't trust the information we're providing, or frankly, they just don't want to hear it or believe it. So I think there's a combination of both there, right? And so I think when I think about trust, I think we got where we got because we haven't been as transparent as we should be. And so we all took away, okay, what are 10 steps that we can take? Not that we would take all 10 as an executive leadership team here, but what are 10 steps we can take to actually be more transparent, to build trust? And so what I decided I was going to do is we talk a lot about, writing stories, but we never really explain to people why we write them. So at Political Fact, why did you do that fact check? Why was this the one that was the most important that day? And so my takeaway from that is I'm going to now write pretty regularly to the community about the decisions we're making, what went into that reporting, how we accessed it. And so, starting next week, I'm actually going to kick off a weekly newsletter that's going to address some of these issues. So I don't know if that's a great solution. I don't know if it's going to work, but I do want us to try. And again, it's not going to make it all go away. But I think if we can have better understanding of our purpose, then I think that might help 4 people who were going to attack us, maybe not, that day, but, we get two people and not 6 that day, for instance, if they understand. I also try as unless they get really, really nasty, I also try to respond to most folks who email me. And often what I'll get back is, I still don't agree with you or believe you, but I appreciate you. Appreciate you responding. And I think at that there's a level of respect there, at least, that I'm not hiding or running from your criticism. You might not believe what I'm saying, but I'm going to respond to you as to why we approached it that way or why that's the source we cited. And I think we just need to do a lot more of that.
I didn't really have a question. I just had a comment I wanted to add to that. And I think that it's because a lot of times they forget that we're real people. Like, because we live in this world, which is so digital, they just think that they can just email whatever they want, whatever, curse words are on their mind. And then they're really sometimes shocked when they do get an email back. And I have had people say like, oh my God, I'm so sorry I called you the B word. I didn't think you would read this, or I don't think you would reply. And some of them even say that in the email, like, you B word, you're not even gonna reply to this. And they'll just go off like on a rant. And then when I actually reply, they're like, oh my God, I can't believe I wrote that. And so I think that—
You get apologies, Daisy? Lucky.
I've gotten apologies, believe it or not, just because of that. Because once they realize like, oh my God, there's an actual person like that read what I wrote, that cared enough to reply. So it might seem really crazy and outrageous that we have to remind people of our humanity, but I think that, it does have like a positive payoff sometimes. Some people will still think that I'm a, whatever they want to think of me. And that's fine. If they want to live with that hate, that's in their heart, not mine. But I think that engagement and kind of saying like, hey, yes, I did read what you said, and this is what I have to say about, whatever criticism or feedback that they have, I think that it is helpful sometimes.
That is such a good point, Daisy. Thank you for bringing that up. Was someone else about ready to jump on? Any other questions?
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question. First off, hi, Katrice, how are you? It's good to see you. I actually want to go back to Roe v. Wade, something that had been weighing on my mind, but I don't know, I couldn't decide, and so I wanted to get your opinion. So I was asked to write about abortion like before the ruling came down, and I said yes. And then the ruling happened, and I just feel really heavy about it. And so part of me wants to go to my editor and be like, can you actually take me off of this? But I don't want to like ruin my career, right? Like, I don't want to ruin myself. And I don't know. I just wanted to get your thoughts about a reporter asking not to do a story anymore, or to be taken off of a topic.
I actually think that you, more than ever, this is a time for you to take care of yourself. And so you should not be afraid to have that conversation, Mabenti. I think it's really important because your mental health, your well-being is Look, there's a lot of news you can write about. Trust me. So if this one is hitting you in a place where you just need to walk away from it, and it might not be forever, right? But you don't know when that might change for you. It might not. I think it's important to have those kinds of conversations. It's interesting because 20 years ago, or, I'm dating myself here, I would have probably been afraid to have that conversation too. And I think that's how we got to this place we are, where we didn't talk about mental health. We didn't feel as if our industry or even our management wanted to hear that. And I think, I know where you work kind of a very inclusive environment. And so I think it's okay for you to have that conversation. And I'll say this again, if for some reason you feel as if there are negative consequences for having that conversation, then ask yourself if there's maybe a different team to work on, or, a different opportunity, because it's critically important that we understand where you are and where you can be most effective. And that's not where you can be most effective right now, because you need some time away from it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Katrice.
Thank you for saying that, definitely. Any other questions, comments?
Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. As an editor, I wanted to get your perspective, because I feel that when it comes to online harassment, that's especially prevalent in my experience in our newsroom, and kind of speaking to colleagues as well. It's kind of more prevalent among reporters of color and women, especially young women. I cover immigration, which is a very polarizing subject. So there's always kind of a lot of feedback, a lot of it very negative, that also kind of gets to that. That kind of comes with publishing every story. And so I'm wondering, as an editor, if there's something that you do differently, or something that you think should be done differently to to assist or either provide resources or anything else to these reporters that are kind of more likely to get these types of harassment online.
Yeah, I think it's really important that to me, there's kind of a group of folks that are probably going to be subject to this in the newsroom more than others, but I think it could be any of us, right? Breaking news folks, people who cover law enforcement, who are probably involved in immigration coverage, really polarizing topics, probably your political team, and so I think part of our onboarding needs to change as an industry for these groups of journalists. Let's talk to them about the fact that you're probably going to experience some of this. So let's talk about the resources we have when they're being onboarded, so that they're not hit with it suddenly and then we're trying to deal with it. So, I haven't explored this Elite Me app, but should part of that onboarding be to have that conversation? Would you like us to use this tool for you? If this happened, here are the steps we can take. Here's our security measures we have in place. I think having these conversations is really important, and kind of coming up with kind of a toolkit to help our staff, but to have that conversation ahead of time so they can remember, we did talk about this, and there'll be a little less stress and anxiety because they know we were already prepared to help them. And I think here I see this across this newsroom. It's those teams in particular, right? People who cover federal, like our federal courts reporter. I mean, Kevin I feel so bad for him, but knowing, we know pretty much most of the time he writes about a certain topic, this is what's going to happen. And so we're prepared for it. He's done a really good job because he's so seasoned at figuring out how he can protect himself. But I still call him every time. Hey, Kevin, are you okay? I heard about this. So it doesn't mean that because it happens to somebody 10 times, you don't stop reaching out. You still want to actually, as their editor, to say, hey, are you okay? I know this happened again. You're going to tell me you're fine, but are you really? And so that needs to be all a part of the conversations we're having when we're hiring and when or when we come into these positions.
I should say that Rafael Carranza is with the Arizona Republic, and he's also been involved in two recent huge stories. He was sent to cover Uvalde for the paper, and also the tragedy of the migrant workers in the truck.
Wow.
And so, as we offer this kind of conversation and access to our fellows, it's so important to hear this kind of insight from you, and particularly for these fellows to realize that their presence in a newsroom makes such a difference, and hopefully to aspire to have the role and the seat at the table that you have. So I'm going to give you sort of the last word in these last few minutes of your joining us. And as we talked about early on, you said, talked about being on that plane and you got 3 stories to edit and 2 meetings to go to, and you're thinking, I'm gonna lose my mind. But how you ultimately got to the place that you won't break me. I'm gonna make this work. So give these journalists your message, your recipe, or your advice for realizing that even though it may be difficult in these coming years in their early careers, there's value to hanging in there and keeping it going.
Absolutely. I would say, despite all the challenges in our profession, despite sometimes still feeling like even if there are 20 of us in a news institution, it's not enough, right? I would never want to do anything differently. This is the one job that I have it's like when I think about really wanting to have a career since middle school, I knew this was the career I wanted to have. And it's because we can serve our communities in just instrumental ways, unlike others. And so what I'll say to you is it gets very, very difficult. Sometimes you feel the pressures of, your staff or your colleagues. You feel the pressure of wanting to lift others, to mentor, to be menteed. You feel the pressure of your family pressures. But I would say, never lose sight of why we do this. Never forget what you value the most and what makes you happy. And so a couple tools that I use, and I was sharing this with Rachel. So one thing is I try to make sure every week that I have so many hours devoted to why I got into this business. So, a lot of my meetings are dealing with budgets and legal situations and stuff that I'm like, God, I didn't think I'd have to do this as a journalist, right? But I make sure that what I love the most is great storytelling, a great investigative story. So I make sure I have several meetings on my calendar every week that go back to the whole reason I got in the profession in the first place, because that makes me happy. And I try to end my day when I can on a meeting like that. So that's one tool I have. The other tool and suggestion that I would say to you guys is, think about when you're at your, when you're so stressed out and maybe you feel like you're hitting a breaking point, what will make you smile and laugh? And so there are two things, two kind of songs that have guided me through. And I have a really good friend. She's an editor in the business I've known for a long time. And so she used to tell me when she was a top editor at a previous place that I worked at, she had that song, y'all gonna make me lose my mind up in here. And so she would just play that and remember, they're not gonna make her lose her mind, but it made her kind of in her seat, do a little dance and smile and move forward. And so that's one thing. And then more recently, the same friend sent me a text on the plane when Beyonce's new song, Break My Soul, came out. And so that has become something that I think about. And the last thing that I would say is, think all the time about what you need to take care of yourself. And so sometimes that might be saying no to something. Sometimes that might mean you just need to take a mental health day. There's nothing wrong with that. And frankly, I kind of have struggled with this. Why do we have to tell people it's a mental health day? You can if you think it's important. I think for your staff to know they can, but you just need a day. You need to understand when those moments hit. A couple of months ago, I just needed a day away from everything. And so I booked a half a day at the spa and I went to the spa. So understanding what you need to get through, I think is going to be really, really important. And knowing you can always reach out to me or whoever is your mentor. I may know some of you. I know some of you. I don't know all of you, but know that there are a lot of people like me who want to help and who want to be a resource to you.
They'll have to stand behind me. I'll be reaching out, definitely. And I cannot tell you how important and valuable this session has been for all of us, all of the fellows in the program. And so Katrice Hardy of the Dallas Morning News, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.